Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, July 17th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And let me remind commissioners, please make sure your microphone is lighted and speak into the mic for the record. We'll call roll. Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie.
Present.
Ah, perfect timing, thank you. Commissioner Crane. Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Meiske.
Present.
Commissioner Urquia.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow.
Present.
And Commissioner Faulkner is present. So we've got most of us here on this rainy evening.
Mr. Chair, if we could, I know it might deviate a little bit from the norm here, but since he was a member of the council and a dear friend, I'd like for us to maybe observe a moment of silence in a passing of Derek Moorhead, who passed away this morning from his severe complications with throat cancer. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that does come as a shock. All right. Moving ahead, we have no personal appearances scheduled this evening. One item on the consent agenda, acceptance of minutes from our June 19th, 2018 meeting. And unless any of the commissioners have concerns about the minutes, I would entertain either a motion to approve consent agenda or accept minutes from the June 19th, 2018 meeting as presented.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from the June 5th meeting.
I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Urquia, second by Commissioner Meiske to accept minutes from our June 19th, 2018 meeting. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, sorry, I ran out of fingers. Any opposed and abstentions? Commissioner Armstrong abstaining. So the vote is 7 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstention. Thank you very much. We'll move ahead on our agenda. Nothing this evening under old business, which takes us directly into case 18012. The proposed 28th Amendment to the Unified Development Code. This case will require a public hearing. And Mr. Grass or Mr. Cataret, as you wish, would you please present the case to us?
Thank you, sir. As you mentioned, we're here this evening to discuss the proposed 28th Amendment to the Unified Development Code. Excuse me. This evening, there are 12 separate sections that staff has compiled for a presentation this evening. And as you mentioned, it does require a public hearing. Because of that, it was advertised in the June 28th edition of the Journal newspaper. The items of record for this evening are the Growth and Management Plan, the Unified Development Code itself, the Notice of Publication in the Journal newspaper, and the staff report. To kind of go through this, since there are 12 separate sections, I think the best way to go through the staff report would be for staff to touch on each of the 12 sections, and then at the end of that, if there's questions on individual or specific sections or questions, we can address that at the end. So I'll just start on page 2. I'll just go through each of these sections one by one and kind of talk a little bit about them, highlight the most important part of each one of them. They're all fairly minor. Most of them are just kind of revisions or clarifications, but there are a couple major changes here to talk about this evening. The first one in section 1 deals with it would allow the elimination of curb and gutter along parking spaces in all commercial development throughout the city, provided that wheel stops are provided in all parking spaces, and that in addition to that, some sort of stormwater runoff or BMP measure would be provided to catch the water runoff from those parking spaces and treat it before it discharges into our stormwater system. Currently, really the only location where we have parking lots with no gutter would be like the parking lot at Hawk Ridge Park, so that's similar to what it could look like. The access aisles and things of that nature would still require curb and gutter to eliminate the ability for cars to drive off into the grass. But provided that wheel stops and BMPs are provided, the curb and gutter along parking spots is proposed to be eliminated, or at least have that ability. Section 2 adds some clarifying language. It reduces the maximum number of right turn movements triggered as part of a traffic study that would require a right turn lane. It reduces that from 50 down to 45. The reasoning behind that is just to bring it to match the current requirements of the MoDOT standards. Just add some matching between those two documents. Section 3 adds some more clarifying language. It proposes to clarify that driveway spacing shall be in accordance with the minimum standards established by the APWA. One of the things that we deal with is having our own set of standards. We often reference other standards as well, such as the APWA, other organizations that have similar criteria and standards. So when those documents are updated, often ours are outdated for some time until we go back through this process and update that. So by adding this language and just referencing that it must be in compliance with APWA, it eliminates that necessity. Section 4 deals with street trees provided in residential developments. It proposes language that would require additional planting space for street trees when they're provided as an amenity to the subdivision. One thing that you might have seen as you're driving throughout some of our neighborhoods that have street trees as amenities is that they start to heave the curbs and sidewalks as the trees start to mature. So by requiring that additional foot, or at least an expansion of the right-of-way, it gives those trees a little more breathing room to grow and spread their roots without having to retroactively go back and fix sidewalks and invest money in fixing those pieces of infrastructure. So with that extra foot, it would eliminate that need. Section 5, if you remember back to our last conversation, our site plan review, we talked a little bit about the requirements for screening as far as trash receptacles and recycling receptacles. So staff took that conversation into consideration and changed the requirements a little bit to require all recycling receptacles to be screened in accordance with the sections of the code. So all trash receptacles and recycling receptacles would be subject to those requirements. Section 6 deals with the certificate of insurance that's required within our UDC. Again, within that, there's a table that you'll see in your packet. Those numbers they don't change very often, but when they do, we're also required to go back and then update that table in the code. So by referencing the amounts established by the city using that language, it's able to change periodically without having to go back again and change the tables in the code. So it just eliminates that inconsistency between those two separate documents. Section number 7, it proposes to eliminate the construction standards for cul-de-sacs within the city. So it eliminates the minimum 100-foot diameter requirement for cul-de-sacs and incorporates the new reference to our design manual, which includes the new design of our teardrop cul-de-sac, which you can see throughout a lot of the new phases of Creekmore and some of the new subdivisions within the city. So again, it just takes out that design requirement that is no longer applicable because we do not require or allow that design for a cul-de-sac within the city. They must comply with the new teardrop standards. Section number 8, it takes out a lot of unnecessary language that's also found in one of our design manuals that our AP or our Public Works staff uses. So it's just taking out unnecessary language in our code where it's often referenced in the Public Works design manual. So just eliminates some of that language and clarifies it in a different document. Section 9 deals with sidewalks, so this would modify the requirements of where sidewalk is placed in between the right-of-way and on the property line. So currently with the 4-foot width of sidewalk, it's required to be structured 1 foot off of the property line. And I'll touch on the next proposal here in a second, but essentially it would require it to be constructed right on the property line. And then section 10 kind of feeds into our last one. This proposal proposes to increase the minimum width of new sidewalks from 4 feet to 5 feet. So again, with that increase in width, kind of speaks to the modification in section 10. Now they would be required to be installed right up to the property line. Section 11 just deals with a couple of the cases we've had here in the past with the vacation of rights of way and easements. Previously, the table that we have in our UDC that kind of outlines the review process and approval process for different types of applications and cases. We simply just didn't have that type of process in that table, so this just adds it and adds the language that establishes the process that type of request must go through. And then section 12 just clarifies the definition of a manufactured home. So the language that it really simply adds is that anything that isn't constructed to the International 1 and 2 Family Dwelling Code would be considered a manufactured home, and therefore would only be allowed in a manufactured home park, which is a specific zoning district that you would have to have in order to have that type of home. That would conclude all 12 sections. Staff did submit proposed findings of fact for your consideration. Given tonight, this is under review by the Planning Commission. Given the recommendation of the Commission this evening, it will go forward to City Council for first reading on the 27th of August and second reading on September 10th of 2018. Staff does recommend that we accept the proposed findings of facts and forward the case to City Council with a recommendation of approval. That would conclude staff report. If there's questions on any specific section, I know myself, Mr. Rokos, and Mr. Catterett would be happy to answer those for you.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Grass. I think before we get into a lot of further discussion, let's open the public hearing on case 18012, 28th Amendment to the Unified Development Code. If anyone from the public would like to speak, this is the chance to come forward to the podium. And seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing and open the floor for discussion by the Commission. Commissioner Meiske.
Okay, I only have one comment in section 5. It's on page 4 of the thing. It's just a grammatical error. It needs to be an and after item 2, after assessed, and then you changed the 3, but you struck it out on item 3. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. So you need to add that to 2.
Yep. Thank you. Makes sense to me.
See, I do read these things.
He probably put that in just to see if anybody was paying attention. I've got a few questions, and I'll just space them around. So section 3 on page 2, the driveway spacing, I don't really think I have much concern, but new statement says spaced in accordance with minimum intersection spacing established by APWA. So Mr. Rokos, I think question probably is best directed to you. Compared to the old criteria, which required at least 125 feet, yada, yada, how does that compare with what's in APWA's standards?
The EPWA actually shows several different configurations, and so it really matters which configuration you're talking about.
Okay,
I mean, we'd have to do exact examples.
Yeah, let me phrase the question a little differently then. So, in your opinion, does the change to refer to the APWA standards give us more leeway on driveway spacing than we had previously, or is it a wash?
It should be about the same. Now, I didn't
Okay. compare
every single example of it, but it's meant to give proper spacing between them.
Yeah,
There really isn't that big of a change.
reasonable requirement.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. Please interrupt or get my attention if other commissioners have questions as we go. Section 5 in our previous discussion, I know I made the statement, I don't remember how the rest of the commission felt, but we were talking about the Ripple, the very attractive, and I'm actually being serious, I kind of like the purple, but the Ripple container that's for recycling glass over on Price Chopper's parking lot. And I know in past we have had Abitibi yellow paper recycling containers. Seems like those have all pretty much disappeared. Probably the price of recycled paper dropped. But what I wanted to do with Section 5 was make it a clear distinction. If it's a restaurant or a business that's adding a separate recycling bin in addition to their trash bin, then I definitely agree it should be screened. It's kind of like what's the difference? They both look like dumpsters. But if it's a recycling container for public use, I think screening is detrimental to the public knowing it's there, and especially like in the case of the Ripple, it moves around. So I'm actually wanting to make a distinction that it doesn't need to be screened. Yeah. Commissioner Wiggins.
Thank you. Under A, second line, the last word says non-residential uses. So is that substantial enough? The Ripple bin is what I would consider community. It's probably both business and residential use, so it wouldn't fall into a non-residential use.
Well, we have our lawyer here tonight.
I just was, to me, that clarifies that, you know, if it's a restaurant who has their own recycle bin, that's there for their purpose, or a shopping center for their purpose, as opposed to us as citizens. I think, to me, that's clarified enough. But
Yeah,
Mr. Zur,
I was worried about it. So good point. Mr. Zur?
I think you're covering it. The only other suggestion I was going to have is if you wanted to put in right before the recycling receptacles to make a distinction for private versus public. You could simply insert in there for, but it does make a non-residential use. The notion would be you're trying to be able to have outdoor trash receptacles that would be in parking lots that are not going to be subject to permanent screening. The only other thought I'd have is that if you wanted to, as a commission, you could make a recommendation that you specifically exclude or accept out from this provision the large receptacles for recycling that are located in commercial parking areas or commercial use for public use.
Yeah, that's more along my thinking, and I didn't really want to leave it to chance, because as clear as the intent is to us tonight, as time goes on, you know, it may be interpreted differently. So we go back to the words on the page, and I guess what I was leaning toward, Mr. Zur, was to actually specifically accept recycling receptacles provided for public use. And I'm not sure if that's the best words, but you know, thinking that if it's for business use, commercial use, we want it screened regardless of whether it's recycle or trash. If it's recycle provided for public use, to me that was perhaps clear enough.
If I could, that
Yeah.
may qualify as temporary trash receptacles, and that would fall under your C. Temporary trash receptacles are not required to comply with this section and shall comply with the requirements of section 420.0601.
Right.
You could potentially put in there temporary trash receptacles or recycling receptacles for public use. May
Yeah.
give you your exemption that you're looking for.
That seems like a pretty good fit. So yeah, I don't think I'd want to depend solely on temporary trash receptacles, because somebody would make a distinction between trash and recycle. You know, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But I like your suggestion about incorporating the exclusion for publicly available recycle containers and including that in C.
So the notion would read on C, temporary trash receptacles or recycling receptacles for public use are not required to comply with this section. Does that work?
That sound good? Okay. So as we go forward with a motion, someone can make a note to include that change. Thank you very much. All right. Moving ahead, we picked up Commissioner Meiski's comment there. And we addressed my concern about the cul-de-sacs and design standards. The only other thing that's still kind of sticking with me is the sidewalk requirement changing from 4 to 5 feet minimum, and I've lost it here for a minute, and I apologize. I guess that's section 9, 10. Yeah, yeah. I'm getting, well, and 9 and 10 are kind of related too, so I'm not sure whether 10, I think 10 has an impact on 9. The issue I have is pretty much I've not shaken myself from the thought that I expressed when we discussed this earlier. I've been looking as I drive through Raymore, and I've been looking at residential neighborhoods with 4-foot sidewalks, and personally I'm happy with 4. When I look at the trail along the west side of Fox Ridge Drive, I know that's wider. That makes perfectly good sense, and I would be perfectly fine with 5-foot sidewalks along, I'll probably use the wrong word, but arterials, collectors, major streets. When I get back into a neighborhood that typically dead ends or has courts, circles, I just don't see the need for traffic offsetting. And what I'm stuck on is, frankly, 5 versus 4 is 25% more concrete. To me, that translates not only into more cost, but more impervious surface. And I guess also the thing that occurred to me, you know, Raymore is not fully developed. We're definitely not done, but we have a lot of existing neighborhoods with 4-foot sidewalks. To me, I think it's just going to look downright strange if we've got 4 foot in some neighborhoods, 5 in others. And I know, you know, we've done this on sign codes, other things where we've raised the bar, slowly improved the appearance of Raymore. So I'm not totally stuck on that, but I think what I'd like to hear is, for instance, I know, and thank you very much for the handout in the packet. Actually, I will say on the flip side, I think their recommendation was something like 7 quoted in certain places. I probably can't spot it right off, but I kind of looked at 7 and I was like, ouch. Well, 5 to 7 feet wide in residential areas. That was last page, pedestrian through zone, but I'm still concerned. I don't have a problem with going to 5 along major thoroughfares, but I'm just not happy with the idea of going to 5 universally on all new development. So I wonder other cities that we might benchmark in the Kansas City metro area. Do you know what the practice is currently in those cities?
Sure, and I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Kress. I just want to provide a clarification because the current requirement is 5 foot on collector and arterial roads.
It's already there.
So it's already there.
Thank you. Yeah.
So if the commission chooses to keep that, then we just eliminate this proposal because on the local streets it'd be 4 foot. Collector arterial is already 5.
Sure.
So we already have that covered. And then private drives, such as the drive in Galleria, one side of the street has to be 4 foot. That's already in code as well.
Okay,
So
great.
just want to clarify that.
No, thank you. No wonder I'm happy with 5 on major streets.
So you had
Mr.
a couple
Grass.
questions.
I heard 4 or 5 questions, and so I'll try to answer all of them.
Well,
if I don't.
I think we could probably almost summarize them, but I'll take away one of your arguments in favor of 5. Obviously, the current bodies recommend 5 as a minimum, so I already see that. I'm primarily, I guess, wondering, you know, what's Lee's Summit doing, what's Belton, what's Grandview, perhaps, dare I ask, what's Leewood doing, or something like that, or Independence, comparable Kansas City suburbs.
Sure. And staff did complete a lot of research on some of our surrounding communities, and it's really across the board. There really is no consistency from one community to the next. Some say it's 5 foot for all sidewalks. Some say it's 5 foot for collectors and arterials, and 4 foot for local streets like we have.
Did you find any smaller than 4?
No, 4 foot is generally the minimum
4
across
foot's
the board.
minimum.
Yeah, you
Thank
don't
you.
generally find it anything smaller than that. But some cities, they really get into the weeds and get really specific. And in, collector roads in this environment would be a 10-foot sidewalk or an 8-foot sidewalk if there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. So it really is across the board, and I'd be more than happy to share. I don't have that document with me, but I'd be more than happy to share that with you all. It has the requirements for probably 10 or 15 cities that we looked at. Probably would have been useful to share that with you all. But I will say there are several communities out there that have moved to the 5-foot minimum. And it's really, when you look at other documents like the Federal Highway Administration, some of their design manuals, 5-foot is really become the minimum. Not only because is it more comfortable for people to walk, not only for the average person, but for individuals with disabilities or in wheelchairs that also are required to walk, whether it's just to the store or down the street to a bus stop, whatever the case is. 5 foot is really the minimum width required for them to turn their wheelchair around or make those left or right turns when they're going up and down the sidewalk. We don't really have a lot of public transit where somebody would need to get to something like that, but still, if somebody's just wanting to take a stroll through their neighborhood or to the trail or something, it's important to think about how, not only how am I able to get there, but how somebody in a wheelchair or with a walker, how are they able to get to those facilities as well.
And I would just add to that, with two little ones, when we go for walks and strollers, if people are walking towards us
Can't get around.
and we have a stroller, I know the sidewalk size we currently have, one of us has to leave the sidewalk to get around, whereas an extra foot, I think, would probably address that issue.
Well, and I can see also, bicycles meeting or a bicycle meeting a wheelchair, something like that. Yeah, definitely 4 foot is a bind. I think, Mr. Grass, also one of the other things where going from 4 up concerns me, kind of depends on the scale of the neighborhood. Creekmore is one interesting situation because the houses are, to me, fairly high density and in return for an awful lot of open space. But I look at the front yard and, I think taking another foot for sidewalks there is actually going to be fairly noticeable. Morning View's probably a kind of a unique situation. It was private streets till just recently, so I'm not sure what the status of their sidewalks was, but Morning View, Foxwood Springs, when you have smaller homes closer together, that 25% increase in concrete to me is significant and is actually making a significant cut in the amount of grass and or pervious surface that's still available. So it's more a concern probably in neighborhoods that are higher density, smaller homes.
Sure. When you got, higher density of homes, obviously there's less green space, less open space, unless they're in dedicated tracks for that specific use. One thing I wanted to touch on, just because I know it was a question at our last meeting, was the increased or associated increase in cost, as well as the impervious surface that you all had questions on. So I did do a little research with our Public Works Department, who oversees a lot of the construction of sidewalks. Just try to go through what the cost has been for sidewalks versus what it might be in the future for a 5-foot sidewalk. And in doing that, they kind of told me that the costs that are associated with the sidewalk, the majority of that comes from the labor that's required, for the crews to show up, to have their trucks and equipment out there. And very little of that cost is actually associated with the material itself. So it might seem, intuitive that the 25% increase in sidewalk would be related to the 25% increase in cost. But in doing the math and kind of the research with the different departments, it's really only, depending on the lot size, it's really only between a 6% and a 10% increase in cost, only because once the crews are out there, they're there. That's the majority of the cost. It doesn't take too much longer to do a 5-foot sidewalk versus a 4-foot sidewalk. And I think Mr. Rokos did the math. I think it was to add that additional 1 foot of sidewalk, it's only like 1 yard of concrete. So it's not as considerable as you would think. Adding that 1 foot.
So setting up the forms and all that's going to be the same regardless of width, right? Okay, thanks. That's a good point.
Makes sense.
Commissioner Wiggins.
Is that from a city perspective or from a consumer perspective? Because, when people talk about concrete work, they charge by the square foot. They don't charge by it's a 4-foot sidewalk or a 5-foot sidewalk. If you have a 5-foot by 20-foot sidewalk, it's still 200 square feet of concrete. So they don't really care about the people already being there, and the forms have to be done one way or the other. It's, I mean, if it's $2 or $4 a square foot. So I didn't know if that was based on city, where we have large contracts for buying, 85,000 square feet of concrete, but somebody who has to, if there's new development put in, because this is also where we're talking about new developments, not existing, but,
Sure.
If that gets paid for by the homeowner, if Bob's Concrete Company charges $3.50 a foot, it is still a 25% increase, not a 6% increase, because they're not going to give you that discount just for that extra little bit.
Sure. And the way that it was shared with me, it was a per square foot cost, and I believe the cost was somewhere around $6 a square foot. And that's simply what we were given for our, contracts to go install sidewalk on certain lots. So it may be different for a contractor that's building a house. But from that $6, I believe $4 of that was associated with the labor, and $2 was associated with materials. So that's where you can kind of surmise the difference in what it costs for materials and labor. And I can't speak to what it might cost if I was building a house. I don't know if that would be quoted differently. Just the research that we were done was on the information that we had from previous projects. But that's a really good point.
I had a quick question.
Yeah, Commissioner Bowie.
Thank you. Are there examples right now existing of 5 foot in width sidewalks in residential areas that you can speak of?
Not that I'm aware of off the top of my head. The majority of where you would find that would be on some of our major roads, like we were saying with the collectors and arterials.
Well, when we go down 58, let's say 58, for example, that's wider than 5 feet. That's probably, I don't know, 10 feet, not 10, 7 feet or something.
8 or 7.
So I'm just curious if I can think, because I've done a lot of walking in the area, and as the gentleman said, when you're walking on the 4 foot, I'm walking fast, and there's a couple coming at me. One of them has to stagger the other. It gets a little inconvenient. I understand the walkability, so I definitely understand the walkability piece. If we've talked about being a community of walkers, et cetera, it does help that. I'm just curious, are there any examples that we can speak of and say, yeah, if you go down the subdivision in Cedar Creek or whatever, that's 5 foot. That's kind of what it looks like. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head. The only thing that would really, a neighborhood that you go to that would be more walkable would be like a PUD zone where they would have increased pedestrian trails or private sidewalks in addition to the required public sidewalks. Now they're more than likely still 5 feet, but if you look at the additional pedestrian amenities, you're oftentimes going to see a lot more people out walking. It's hard to compare apples to oranges by saying, more sidewalks equals more walkability, and then wider sidewalks equals more walkability. They're not really the same thing. So at this point, I would say no, there's no subdivisions where you can go in and look at what a 5 foot would look like. You would really, the only examples you would have would be down some of our major roads where the sidewalk is considerably wider.
Can you go ahead and address, because you started to address the costs, but you didn't address the impervious surfaces. Can you address that?
Sure, and I'll touch on that a little bit. I believe Mr. Rokos might be able to address that a little bit better than I can. But in speaking to our stormwater tech who deals with this, stuff day in and day out, so if you think back to section number 9 where we changed where the sidewalk, it now has to be constructed to the property line. Since we're not decreasing the amount of green space in between the street and the sidewalks are generally sloped towards the street, so the water drains into that green space. Because we're not decreasing that amount of green space, it's believed that would not be, as big of an issue as you would think with more impervious surface. And then I believe Greg had some information on just the type of soils that we have and their permeability, would have some effect on the amount of water that's absorbed as well.
Basically, when you talk about infiltration or of water into the ground, this area is basically all fatty clays, which resist water absorption. And so most of the properties around here are built with clay soils all around them, unless you have someone haul in some black dirt that's on top of it. Even in today, like after the first few seconds when it rains, that fatty clay is full of moisture and everything else runs off. So you see a lot of water that runs over the curbs and then down. And so most of it is impervious or nearly impervious already. And so there's not a whole lot of difference when you study the infiltration rates of our clays versus what the concrete is. The concrete's going to shed it all, or most of it, because it has, of course, it has cracks in it, so it's going to go in. But then the impervious surface of the clays are not going to allow much infiltration at all. If you think about it, we build ponds out of this clay. And why do we build them out of it? So they hold water. And so most of this clay that you see that's all around our homes, all around our businesses, are all the same clay that you'd make a pond out of that's holding water, that's resisting water infiltrating. And so the idea that the water is going to all infiltrate in the ground is not true. Most of the water here runs off, goes into our storm system, goes in the creeks. And that's why we have, when it rains hard, we have floods.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll just kind of add to that. One of the things that I kind of looked at and just played around with the numbers on was looking at, how much would that additional 1 foot of sidewalk, whether it's 70 linear feet, depending on the width of the lot, just how much would that increase the percentage of material in the lot that's impervious? So generally in our code, 30% lot coverage is the maximum. And then in addition to that, you're required to, depending on your zoning, you're required to maintain a landscaped area of X percent. So that 1 foot, additional foot of sidewalk on a 70-foot lot, so 70 feet of, additional sidewalk, I kind of compared that to, well, what if you lived in a house that didn't have a patio, but you wanted to add, a 10 by 15 patio in your backyard? That patio would have a much larger effect on the stormwater runoff and impervious surface increase than the 1 foot of sidewalk, or that 1 additional foot of sidewalk would have. So while it seems like a lot, there's other things that would occur on a property that the property owner would subject themselves to that would have a much greater increase on stormwater runoff and things of that nature. It's kind of hard. It's not exactly apples to apples in that case, but it just sort of puts it in a different perspective on what that increase might look like.
Yeah, Commissioner Wiggins.
I know in the past we've talked about this is, wouldn't be impacted by the new curbs we're putting into some place, or sorry, not curbs, sidewalks. So it'd be impacted mostly by the new developments. When you say that, are you talking about, like, for instance, as Creekmore brings in a new phase, would those sections of that new phase be required, or because the development already has 4-foot sidewalks, they get to retain 4-foot sidewalks? That way we don't have little funnel sections and whatnot. Or is it, if Cooper comes and says, okay, well, here's whatever, Westbrook 19, and, here's a new plat, does that all have to be 5 foot? Or is it just purely, hey, somebody's putting a new development down off of, North Cass Parkway, boom, that's when we start doing 5 foot. So just clarification on that, please.
Yeah, great question. It would be under what we proposed, it would be all new development. So all of Creekmore, any new phases after today even would still be able to get away with the 4-foot sidewalk minimum because that was approved prior to this code change. Now, they could certainly voluntarily do the 5 foot if they would like, but it wouldn't be a requirement. It would be, I believe the date was January 1st of 2018. Any new development past that point would be required to comply with the 5-foot sidewalk.
I would suggest adding that clarification to the wording. I think that's a good question. The way you have it worded, it doesn't really address that. That would just be my suggestion.
Yeah, so if I can butt in as well. So I think what I thought would cover that, Section 10, 3B at the top of page 9, where it said sidewalks constructed in a residential subdivision with a final plat recorded prior to January 1st, 2019 may be 4 feet in width. So I think now what I'm a little puzzled about with Creekmore, obviously preliminary plat's quite old, but that Westbrook at Creekmore 19th or whatever we were hypothesizing, that today would not have a final plat. So final plat would be would be after January 1st, 2019, would be required to have 5-foot sidewalks, isn't that?
Yes, and I apologize. I might have misunderstood that.
That threw me off.
Yeah, my apologies on that. So any final plats within the Creekmore subdivision that are recorded before that date would be satisfied with the 4-foot requirement. However, any phases in the Creekmore development past that date would have to transition to the 5-foot.
So I think the takeaway is an existing subdivision that's under development, plats that have already been filed as final plats would be exempt. Any future plats would fall under the 5-foot rule. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you may not have to clarify that, but maybe that last sentence that you said, anything after that would fall under the rule. I don't know if you need to clarify that, but it could, there could be some ambiguousness.
It's always a good question for Mr. Zur, don't you think?
Well, and the reason that I ask that is because it says a residential subdivision. I would think that most people would argue that Creekmore is a subdivision. It's one subdivision, so it has already undergone the development process. Obviously, there's little sections that have. So that's kind of why I asked, because that, I don't know if maybe that's clear to other people, but to me, I would think that any future sections within the existing subdivision would be exempt from it because, so that's for, I don't know, that's just me, but obviously I know we approve final plats for little sections, but.
That's why maybe there could be a little something you could add at the end of that to further clarify.
Maybe some language on a phase of a residential subdivision or something just to further clarify that, because that could be, I can see how that could be confusing in the future.
Well, and again, you know, I can see somewhere down the road, somebody going through Creekmore, if the older plats were 4 foot and the newer are 5 foot, and somebody says, well, gee, look, this sidewalk narrows down, wonder why that happens. And
Yeah,
of
but I
course,
don't-
we ask that question all the time.
I don't think you're going to be walking down in front of a house and be on a 5-foot sidewalk and still be on the same side of the street with no street intersection and go from 5 to 4. I think what you're going to have happen is you're going to hit the street and you may be on a 4-foot sidewalk when you get to the street, and then when you cross onto a 5-foot sidewalk. Because if you're already started the development of that home, the homes on that side, that's going to be an entire phase or plat. You're not going to pick and choose the different houses that are being, and then have a 5-foot, 4-foot, 5-foot.
I see your point. I'm not sure I totally agree the way the plats are phased.
Yeah, because
sometimes.
for instance, if you come down Creekmore Drive, if you're familiar with the golf course, from 15 to 16 and then down 18, they've just been stepping section by section and doing 30 lots, 30 lots, 30 lots. Creekmore Drive continues that whole way. And so on the one side, there might be a cul-de-sac or a street that goes down towards the lake, but north-south on the west side of that road, it's just one after another after another. So you would have eventually now given they're going to get it in before 19, before they probably hit an intersection, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, Mr. Zur? I thought I saw a motion. You didn't have anything to add now? Okay. I guess there's Commissioner Armstrong.
Apologies. If we could circle back to the runoff question. I just looked quickly at runoff coefficients, and although clay soil is less pervious and has a coefficient of about, depending on the degree, it looks like between 0.17 and 0.35. That's much more similar to your sandy soils of 0.1 than concrete, which is 0.9. So between 3 and 5 times less pervious. Since Raymore has had an issue with runoff in the past, do we have anything to assess what the impact of this would be?
If you all wish, we could certainly look more deeper into it with our stormwater tech and run some more detailed, I don't want to say analysis, but just look deeper into it and figure out what, how that would actually affect it. We'd be more than happy to do that.
That would seem reasonable to me.
But to your point earlier, you're saying that the distance between the street and the sidewalk isn't shrinking. Therefore, the runoff between the sidewalk and the street shouldn't be impacted, I would think, because you still have the same amount of space for it to absorb the water before it hits the street.
But your overall surface, you still have, unless I'm not following something, you still have an added foot of less pervious surface over your overall surface area.
I get what you're saying. I guess I'm not as worried about it, I guess would be the way I'd put it, but I guess if everybody else is, then.
Well, I don't know that everybody else is, but Raymore has had fines because of this from the EPA in the past, so.
I guess two more things I'd like to add. One is just a quick observation. I can't remember all the specifics, but I know we've talked about sidewalk connections from a residential, like a cul-de-sac or whatever, from a residential along the side of a lot to get out to a trail, whatever. I feel like that probably would be one of the more objectionable spots to go from 4 to 5. Just, I'm not entirely convinced that the person owning those lots is going to really welcome a public sidewalk running down the side of their house or the side of their yard. And so that's a concern, simply probably one of the worst cases. The other thing, as we've been discussing, I've kind of been trying to think through this, and I kind of feel like, well, damned if we do, damned if we don't, although hopefully there's a better answer. But I think we know from experience, the longer we wait to raise the bar, if we do indeed want to go with, I don't know if I'd call this industry, but if we want to go with industry standards where 5 feet is the minimum, the longer we wait, the less opportunity we've capitalized on, the more lost opportunity there is. By the same token, I'm kind of wondering, I'm still not sold on 5 feet in the normal residential neighborhoods. I do like the idea of digging a little deeper and actually having more of the research, more of the comparables presented to commissions. So I guess I'm kind of wondering what's the downside of taking that change out of the proposal to City Council for now and digging deeper in it. And if we mess with Section 10, how much does that also impact Section 9?
A great question. And I will mention, I should have mentioned this up front, if there are sections of what we proposed here that you think might need a little more research, please feel free to work that into your motion, and we can certainly go back to the drawing boards and think more about it. Because while we would like to see all 12 of these go through this evening, it's likely that there's going to be some concern on some of these topics. But there are other corrections in here that really make a lot of sense and need to be changed. Yeah. So please feel free to pick and choose as you wish, to keep some of these ones that make a lot more sense and kind of a hole in one, if you will, to keep those moving forward through the process. And then any changes, whether it be the sidewalk width or location, whatever the case might be, we can certainly take those back and bring them back at a later time.
Well, I still don't think I caught the answer. If we deferred Section 10, 4 to 5 feet, till a later date, would we also want to defer Section 9 along with it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed. All right.
Mr. Chair, if
Mayor
I could,
Turnbow.
yeah, if I could, I'd like to. I'm kind of agreeing with you, sir, on that particular issue. I'm not sure the need to elevate to 5 feet at this time, but on the width. But I would like to ask Commissioner Armstrong. You said we'd been fined before. I'm not aware. My term in office as mayor through the EPA. Greg, do you have an answer there?
Yes, it's actually not what you're talking about for infiltration to the ground. Infiltration that fines are about is infiltration to the sewer system. Mm-hmm. So what happens in the sewer system is a series of pipes that are connected. What happens over time, the ground settles and the pipes slightly disconnect. They're not seated properly, and water actually flow into them. Some of them are so separated, the water just pours into them. And you need to have a program that goes back and seals the manholes, the whole chimney that comes up from the sewer pipe itself, and then you start going down the lines and start sealing those lines. The city now does have a program to go through and start sealing manholes, and we do that every year. And as you've seen in our yearly submittals, we go through when we seal manholes now to prevent infiltration. And that's the infiltration that we're worried about stopping, because that water then ends up going to a treatment plant, which overflows the treatment plant, which can then send raw sewage into a river, creek, or a lake, or another feature like that.
So what is if I can jump in there and ask a question? Yeah. What's the ramifications of, where do you see the extra water, for lack of a better word, affecting that?
There is no extra water. The water that's falling on the ground right now is hitting that concrete, or it's hitting the clay soils. The clay soils absorb the water very quickly and become impervious. At the beginning, they do have some ability to absorb some moisture, but in a rainstorm like today, after the first quarter inch of rain falls onto that clay, it's all running off. There is no more infiltration to the soil. Mm-hmm. That's why they call it fatty clay, and it gets fat and goes. So there's clays that go all the way from a sandy clay that has more infiltration all the way to a fatty clay that has none. If you go down toward like the river, and at the river, there's places where you have a sandy clay. And if you took like a 5-gallon bucket of water, you could throw it into that type of clay and it would go right through and disappear. This clay's around here, you throw a 5-gallon bucket of water onto it, it all sheets off.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mr. Zer, please.
But I think the simple answer is going to be you're going to have the same rain dropping onto this area. You're adding an area of impervious surface for an additional foot, but that's eventually going to run off of the impervious surface, and eventually when the ground reaches its saturation point, ends up in our storm drainage systems, which handle our storm drainage and exit it out to local streams or
Correct.
a treatment plant or otherwise.
Yep. Thank you. Commissioner Armstrong.
I'm not an engineer, but I would argue that that's not necessarily the case. If you have a more pervious system, that water then is absorbed through the water cycle and not flushed into stormwater and water runoff.
Mr. Chair, I was getting back to what Greg just explained.
Right.
I sit on the Little Blue Valley Sewer District Board as well. We've actually been receiving accolades from them for the reduction in our infiltration in our storm sewer and sanitary sewer systems, because our rates of use also rise during high levels of moisture that go into the sanitary sewer system. And that's the infiltration we're talking about. The ours has reduced significantly since our infiltration or whatever you call it when you fix it.
Program.
Yeah, mitigation program, infiltration mitigation program started. So it's gone down and saved our folks money because we're paid by the gallon to Little Blue Valley Sewer District.
Right. Thank you. Further discussion, or anyone brave enough to try a motion on case 18012?
I had a quick question real quick.
Yeah.
Got it.
Do we have?
Commissioner Bowie.
Yes, thank you, I'm sorry. Do we, is the motion that you're asking for going to include the holding off on 9 and 10?
Well, there's the question, but I think, there's a couple of ways to handle this, but right now, since we have no motion, Mr. Zer, would you like to clarify?
I am happy to perhaps outline a proposed motion for you all to consider.
Boy, it doesn't get any better than that, does it?
That's right.
Shall we hear Mr. Zer's proposed motion? Absolutely. Okay, go to it, Mr. Zer.
My suggestion would be a motion to approve the proposed changes 1 through 8, instruct staff to continue research and evaluation, report back to this commission as it relates to proposed changes 9 and 10 for consideration as a potential 29th Amendment to the Unified Development Code. With regard to the proposed changes, you're going to want to add the word "and" to section 430.110 sub A sub 2, as identified by Commissioner Meinsky,
Right.
and add "or recycling receptacles for public use" in section 430.110 sub C.
And the only thing I did not hear, thank you, Mr. Zer, I'm also concerned about sections 11,
And
12, 13, 14, and 15, which I think we would, which I think we would like to include. So sections 1 through 8, sections,
And then section 11 and 12, because 13,
11.
14, and 15 don't have any changes that need to be addressed.
well, we still want them to be part of the package moving forward, though.
Yeah, we still have to have.
We want everything moving forward except 9 and 10, and then there's the change to the word "and," which Mr. Zer noted, and the change to exempt public recycling containers. That's what I think, but feel free to jump in, Mr. Zer. Is that? No, that's cool. It got just a little complicated, and we appreciate your help. Further discussion before we try to make a motion? You got this? Sure. Commissioner Wiggins.
Gonna give this a shot. I make a motion to approve case number 18012, the 28th Amendment of the UDC, to include section 1 through 8, and to include under section 5, sorry, let me make sure I got this all right. Section 5 to include under subsection C 430110, temporary recycling for public, in reference to the recycling bin screening, as well as to include the word "and" after number 2, or section 430110, number 2. Then to ask staff to review sections 9 and 10 in regards to the sidewalk, and then to approve sections 11 through 15 as is. Did I get it all?
That was a long motion. I forgot.
I'll second it.
Can you repeat that? No.
Was that Commissioner Armstrong's second? I'm sorry.
This is Commissioner Urquilla.
Oh. Commissioner Urquilla. Boy, my hearing is gone. Okay. So I guess I'm going to try to not embarrass myself too much here rephrasing. So regarding case 18012, motion by Commissioner Wiggins, second by Commissioner Urquilla, to accept most of staff proposed findings of fact and sections 1 through 8, 11 through 15, addition of the word "and" at the end of section 5A2, and addition of the exemption or exclusion for public recycling containers at the end of section 5C, and request staff to provide additional research on sections 9 and 10, which will not be going forward. Sound about right? Okay, so that's the motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion on that before we take a vote? No? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wow. 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. And thank you, staff, for all of your help putting that together. And we will see 9 and 10 again, because we had so much fun this evening. All right, that concludes. I've lost my agenda here momentarily. That concludes the new business this evening. Mr. Zur, if you would, we would like to hear the City Council report.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to provide that this evening. Since your last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, there have been 2 regular City Council meetings, one which occurred on June 25th, 2018, and one which occurred on July 9th, 2018. For our purposes, this evening there is nothing from the July 9th, 2018 agenda that will be of direct assistance. Those were second readings and approvals of some of these items, but I will talk about the June 25th, 2018 meeting. At that meeting, we had unfinished business and a second reading which approved the rezoning of Kirby Estates. That was a unanimous approval by the City Council, previously seen by the Planning and Zoning Commission on the 15th and approved unanimously prior to that. Also had approval of a second reading for the second replat of Kirby Estates, allowing that to be moved forward and approved as part of their Compass Health Network, which you all again saw on the 15th the prior month. Also had approval for the Sunrise Commons final plat. This was the 58 Highway west of J Highway, Sunrise Commons minor, and then the approval of the Westbrook at Creekmore 14th and final plat, allowing Cooper Land Development to move forward with a 35-lot single-family subdivision. Again, you all saw that on the 5th of June. So that is the conclusion of my staff or City Council report on all of the activities that have occurred within the past 2 weeks that would relate to items that you all have seen and approved. Mm-hmm. I'd always invite the mayor and members of staff to add to that if they are inclined.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Zur. Mr. Cataret, Mr. Gress, we'll move on to the staff report.
Thank you, sir. Just looking at our calendar for upcoming meetings, there's a couple of what I consider major projects currently in the works to be submitted soon to the city. There's been work sessions held by the council at a very high-level discussion point. In fact, one was last evening. If any of you have had the opportunity or will have the opportunity, about a half-hour presentation last night of an industrial project being proposed in the Good Ranch development. That project will be coming forward in the September timeframe. Another project that was presented, again, at a high level to council a couple of months back deals with the Eagle Glen subdivision and the apartment tract just north of the school. That project will also be coming forward in September. With that being said, we have some significant projects during the month of September. We currently do not have applications for August. So I know we could cancel the August 7th meeting.
Right.
I would recommend or request that. We'll leave the August 21st meeting open. We're not at the filing deadline yet, although I don't know if any applications will come in for that meeting.
Okay.
We will definitely have the meetings in September, the two meetings that are on our calendar for September, so please mark those down. Those will be public hearings, 2 for each application, rezonings and preliminary plats. They'll have site plan, they'll have final plat. There'll be a bundle of applications coming to us at once. So a lot of work ahead of us. August may be a little slow, so if I can, just request August 7th at this time to be canceled, and we'll keep the 21st open.
Sure. Unless any of the commissioners have any objections, definitely, I think we can cancel August 7th, and we'll count on staff to get word to us about the August 21st meeting.
I will, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, Commissioner Bowie.
That was such a great tease regarding the industrial project and the apartments in Eagle Glen. Without divulging too much information, are you talking, when you said north of Eagle Glen Intermediate, or Eagle Glen Elementary at this point, are you talking about just across the street from the current apartments?
It is across the street, a little bit to the south.
Gotcha.
So yeah, immediately north of the school is a 20-acre tract of land that was set aside when the subdivision was initially proposed for an apartment community.
Gotcha.
So they finally have a company interested in doing a luxury level Class A apartments there. So very nice community proposed for that tract of land. The industrial site is at the Good Ranch. It's actually south of North Cass Parkway. So the project would require Dean Avenue to be continued to the south of North Cass Parkway.
Okay.
And there's actually still a commercial strip of land along Cass Parkway. The industrial is south of that, so it's quite a ways off of North Cass Parkway.
Okay.
Is what's being proposed. And it's zoned for industrial use. It's a development coming forward that has a couple of tweaks to what we currently have in our codes and our plans, so we need to try to look at adjusting that. We'll be holding good neighbor meetings for all these projects, as well as, of course, public hearings at the Planning Commission. So the neighbors will get we'll have a lot of notices out, a lot of information. The presentation last night is available on our website. There's a very good press release was done by our communications department that gives you a really good summary about last night's meeting and what's being proposed for the industrial park. It's on our website. I recommend you look at that. He outlines the project much better than I ever could. So it gives you great information. Not a lot out there about the apartment community yet, but again, that was a work session, I think, 2 months ago, Mayor, probably, for the Goldenrod development. So there's also a video you can watch on their presentation as well.
Okay, thank you. Stay tuned for the next exciting episode.
Yeah, good time to be in Raymore.
Commissioner Wiggins, did you have another question while we're there?
Oh, it wasn't a question so much as a statement. That definitely check out the Raymore YouTube channel. I watched last night's session. It's a 1.9 million square foot warehousing project that's potentially being proposed. According to the statement that the city put out, upwards of 1,000 jobs could be coming. So very big for Raymore. Watch the video for that one as well as the one for the apartment. It's a very nice high-level complex. So lots of good economic development stuff going on in the city for sure.
Great.
To hopefully spurn some good commercial activity as well.
Absolutely. The developer of the industrial project, very well known, well respected. It will draw other development.
To add on to that, if you look at the work session packet, if you sign up for the packets like we get ours for the city council one, I think economic development had some information in there. I think there was one person that's potentially interested in like what a 65 to 75,000 square foot entertainment space along that area. I mean, there's a lot going on in that area, and that's a prime target for sure. So looking at millions and millions of square feet of retail and commercial space.
Yeah, thank you. Good discussion. Mr. Carteret, if we haven't thrown your train of thought completely off, please continue.
That's all I had for staff report this evening.
Okay, Mr. Rokas.
I just had two things tonight. One is that on Johnson Drive between Dean and Derby, the contractor will be doing final cleanup and final corrections that he has, and that should be open by the middle of next week for public use. 155th Street, like we said. Why does everybody chuckle? I never have to ask.
We didn't have to
actually,
pry it
today
out.
the final paving went on top of the bridge on that project. Next, it will be the guardrail is being installed, and then we are going to put the pipes into the road. It was initially going to be as part of the project, the overlay, but the contractor's right there ready to do the work, so we're going to go ahead and install the pipes and have that done also in the next week or so, and that way the road can be opened. We are opening bids this Thursday then to pave it, and so then we'll get the pavement on top of the road.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you.
I was laughing, Greg, because Johnson Drive's already getting used. I've seen cars go up and down there already.
Officially.
Yeah, unofficially. Unofficially getting used.
It's not official until the ribbon gets cut, right? All right. I'll open the floor for public comment, and seeing none, we'll move to commission member comment. Commissioner Bowie, may I start with you this evening?
Absolutely. No particular comment. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, guys. Nice job.
Commissioner Meiske.
I have no comment for tonight.
Commissioner Armstrong.
Well, I have to comment on the bridge. Congratulations, everybody. I think there should be a party.
You're waiting, aren't you? Commissioner Wiggins.
Yes. Thank you, staff. Additionally, just wanted to say thank you to Mayor Turnbow regarding that moment of silence for Derek. I had the privilege of working with him on the city's Charter Review Commission. Great man who loved Raymore, and this community will definitely, we have definitely lost somebody who loves the city and would put it first before many things in life. So condolences to his family.
Yeah, thank you. Vice Chair Fizer.
I have no comment.
Okay. Commissioner Urquia.
Just as always, thank you, staff, for everything you guys do, and quite a few points you had to bring forward tonight. Well done summarizing, and look forward to our heated debate over 9 and 10 at a future date.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor Turnbow.
I would echo what Commissioner Wiggins and said and kind of add to that. You know, Derek actually got his start in serving the community right here on this commission, and got a taste for what public service is here in the community, and moved on to elective office. Did a fantastic job. There are a lot of legacy projects that are here in town now that can be attributed. You can see his fingerprint on it, and like Commissioner Wiggins said, he will be missed. He was a tremendous asset to this community, and left us far too early in life. We'd hoped for even more great things to come out of Derek, and unfortunately the good Lord's going to get to participate with those rather than us. But I appreciate your comments very much, and thank you again for that moment of silence, and that's really all I have tonight.
I'll be brief. I've got three things. There was one part of the sidewalk material that I wanted to note. I don't think it had any bearing on our case, but at the bottom of the third page, how to get it right, and the last bullet was talking about something I found interesting. Build and maintain with municipal funds. Many communities require property owners to pay for and clear sidewalks, snow and ice, etc. Personally, I'm glad Raymore hasn't imposed that requirement yet, but since sidewalks are a public benefit, a better policy would be to install and maintain sidewalks with public funds. I'm neither in support or disagreement with that statement. I simply wanted to note that, you know, that was part of the material. I found it interesting. In memory of Councilmember Moorhead, I think I would be remiss if I didn't make some totally off-the-wall statement about the urban chicken. And I have fond memories of working with Councilman Moorhead on Planning and Zoning Commission and beyond that, so that is a great loss to the city of Raymore. Thank you to staff. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your patience and your good advice as well. It makes our job easier in spite of the fact that we sometimes tangle things up, but hopefully in the end we come to the right conclusions. So thank you all very much. Unless other commissioners have anything to add, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Urquia and second by Commissioner Maiski. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. And I think we've got 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Thank you all.